The moving truck was a relic of another life, dented, sun-bleached, with a passenger side door that groaned like an old man getting out of bed. Inside, Marcus Thompson looked nothing like the typical new resident of Maple Grove Lane. His left arm was a canvas of memories, an elaborate tattoo weaving a story of travels that most suburban dwellers could only imagine in their most adventurous dreams. Wrapped carefully in a faded silk cloth was the real treasure, a set of brass wind chimes that had survived more journeys than most people take in a lifetime. They had belonged to his grandmother, Evelyn Thompson, a woman whose life was a tapestry of rebellion, adventure, and secrets that whispered through generations. Marcus remembered the day she gave him the wind chimes. It was 3 weeks before her death, in a small cottage in the mountains of Peru where she had lived for the past decade. The room had smelled of sage and old books, with artifacts from her decades as an anthropologist scattered like precious memories. "These aren't just wind chimes, Marcus," she had said, her voice a mixture of wisdom and mischief. "They're a map, a key, a warning." At the time, he had laughed it off. Now, rolling into the perfectly manicured streets of Maple Grove Estates, those words echoed in his mind with a weight he couldn't quite explain. The neighborhood was a study in conformity. Every house looked like it had been cut from the same blueprint, beige or off-white, with identical landscaping that seemed to have been designed by an algorithm of suburban mediocrity. Perfectly trimmed hedges stood like soldiers, mailboxes aligned with mathematical precision, and not a single blade of grass dared to grow out of place. Marcus knew he was an anomaly the moment he pulled up. His moving truck was a riot of color and wear, covered in travel stickers from countries most of his new neighbors could barely pronounce. His personal history was a stark contrast to the uniformity around him. A PhD in anthropological studies, years of investigative journalism that had taken him from the bustling markets of Marrakech to the remote villages of the Amazon, and a collection of stories that would never fit into the cookie-cutter world of Maple Grove. As he began to unload, the wind chimes caught a breeze. The sound was unlike anything the neighborhood had ever heard, not the tinkling of cheap metal, but a deep, resonant melody that seemed to carry whispers of distant lands and forgotten stories. The brass tudes moved with a life of their own, creating a sound that was part music, part warning. Neighbors began to peek through their pristine curtains, perfectly pressed faces with perfectly maintained expressions of polite curiosity. But beneath that facade, something shifted. A collective shiver ran through the street. Something was different. Something was coming. Marcus smiled. He had a feeling Maple Grove would never be the same. The wind chimes continued to sing, a melody of change carried on the suburban breeze. Little did the residents know these weren't just wind chimes. They were the Karen Whitmore's morning routine was a military operation disguised as suburban domesticity. At precisely 5:47 a.m., her alarm would chirp. Not blare, never blare. A gentle reminder that perfection waits for no one. By 6:15, she had already color-coded her day planner, disinfected her kitchen counters, and arranged her collection of HOA violation forms with surgical precision. Her husband, Robert, had long since learned the art of silent compliance. 30 years of marriage had taught him that questioning Karen was like trying to redirect a Category 5 hurricane with a paper fan. He would sip his precisely brewed coffee, read his Wall Street Journal, and occasionally offer a measured "yes, dear" when required. The Maple Grove Estates Homeowners Association was Karen's true kingdom. She had risen through its ranks with the determination of a political strategist and the ruthlessness of a corporate raider. What began as a simple desire to maintain property values had transformed into a near-religious crusade against anything that threatened her vision of suburban perfection. When Marcus Thompson's moving truck arrived, Karen was already watching. Her home office, a meticulously organized command center with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the street, was her surveillance headquarters. The moment the truck's engine sputtered to a stop, she was taking notes. "Unconventional vehicle," she muttered, her Mont Blanc pen scratching against a pristine white notepad. "Excessive travel stickers. Potential violation of community aesthetic guidelines. Section 4.2, paragraph C." The tattoos were her first real point of concern. In Maple Grove, visible tattoos were about as welcome as a raccoon at a dinner party. Most residents preferred their rebellion confined to the occasional bold throw pillow or a slightly asymmetrical flower arrangement. Marcus Thompson looked like he had walked straight out of a National Geographic documentary and into their carefully curated world. But it was the wind chimes that truly set her on edge. Karen had a sixth sense for disruption. It wasn't just about rules, it was about maintaining an energy, a delicate balance that kept chaos at bay. Those wind chimes weren't just a decorative item, they were a threat. She reached for her emergency HOA binder, a three-ring marvel of bureaucratic might that contained every conceivable regulation, cross-referenced and color-coded. Her fingers traced the sections on acceptable exterior decorations and noise pollution prevention. The sound of the chimes drifted through her window. It was unlike anything she had ever heard in Maple Grove. Not the predictable tinkling of mass-produced wind chimes from big box stores, but a deep, resonant melody that seemed to carry stories from distant lands. Robert glanced up from his newspaper. "Everything all right, honey?" Karen's response was automatic. "We have a situation." By noon, she had compiled a preliminary report. Violations were meticulously documented: irregular moving vehicle, excessive personal decoration, unauthorized sound-producing exterior element, potential disruption of neighborhood tranquility. But it was more than that. Something about Marcus Thompson and those wind chimes felt like an invasion, not a physical one, but an invasion of something more intangible. An invasion of spirit, of the carefully maintained status quo that she had spent years protecting. Karen Whitmore was not a woman who allowed invasions. She picked up her phone and dialed the first number on her speed dial. The HOA Legal Counsel. This was going to be a battle, and she was prepared to wage war with the most powerful weapon in her arsenal: bureaucratic precision. The wind chimes continued to sing outside, seemingly unaware of the storm brewing. Marcus Thompson had navigated conflict zones in 3 continents, negotiated with tribal leaders in remote Amazon regions, and survived journalistic assignments that would make most people's hair turn white overnight. A homeowners association violation notice was going to be a walk in the park. The envelope arrived precisely 3 days after his move-in, delivered by a mail carrier who seemed to be moving with the mechanical precision of a well-oiled robot. Crisp white paper, embossed HOA letterhead, sealed with an efficiency that spoke volumes about the organization's commitment to bureaucratic perfection. He opened it with the casual curiosity of someone examining a mildly interesting insect specimen. Violation Code 7.3b glared back at him in bold, authoritative typeface. Unauthorized noise-making decorative item causing potential neighborhood disturbance. Marcus couldn't help but laugh. His grandmother Evelyn would have found this hysterical. She'd spent decades challenging academic institutions, navigating complex cultural landscapes, and here was a suburban HOA trying to silence a set of wind chimes that had traveled more miles than most people's passports. His response would be legendary. Drawing from years of academic writing and investigative journalism, Marcus crafted a response that was part scholarly treatise, part satirical masterpiece. 12 pages long, complete with footnotes, archaeological references, and a comprehensive cultural history of wind chimes that would make a university anthropology department weep with joy. The document began with a meticulously researched introduction regarding Violation Code 7.3b, a comprehensive ethnographic and acoustic analysis of wind chime cultural significance. He traced the origins of wind chimes back to ancient China's Han Dynasty, where they were used not just as musical instruments but as spiritual communication tools. He included detailed diagrams showing acoustic wave patterns, comparative studies of urban noise pollution versus wind chime resonance, and a 5-paragraph subsection on the psychological benefits of ambient sound in residential environments. The footnotes were a work of art. Each reference was impeccably sourced, ranging from obscure academic journals to UNESCO cultural heritage reports. He even included a hand-drawn map showing the global distribution of wind chime traditions, with special emphasis on their role in various indigenous cultures. But Marcus wasn't just being academic. There was a subtle, razor-sharp wit running through every paragraph. Each sentence was a gentle but firm mockery of the HOA's narrow-minded approach to neighborhood aesthetics. He concluded with a formal recommendation. In light of the comprehensive evidence presented, it is hereby proposed that the current violation be not only rescinded, but that the Maple Grove Estates Homeowners Association consider a formal resolution recognizing the cultural and psychological value of diverse auditory experiences within our shared residential environment. The document was printed on archival quality paper, bound with a subtle copper clip that matched the brass of his wind chimes. He hand-delivered it to the HOA office, where the receptionist, a woman who looked like she had seen every possible type of resident complaint, accepted the package with a mixture of confusion and grudging respect. Karen Whitmore would receive the document later that afternoon. Her perfectly manicured fingers would trace the pages, her eyes widening with a combination of fury, and just for a brief, almost imperceptible moment, reluctant admiration. The wind chimes outside continued their melodious dance, seemingly laughing at the bureaucratic drama unfolding. Rumors in Maple Grove Estates spread faster than organic, gluten-free kombucha at a neighborhood potluck, and Karen Whitmore was a master cultivator of suburban mythology. It began innocently enough, or as innocently as Karen could manage. During her weekly book club meeting at Janice Peterson's perfectly appointed sunroom, she casually dropped her first seeds of suspicion. The women sat in a carefully arranged circle, sipping fair trade herbal tea from matching bone china cups, their pristine reading glasses perched on designer reading chains. "There's something unusual about the new neighbor," Karen whispered, her voice dropping an octave. "Those wind chimes. They're not normal." Janice leaned forward, her perfectly Botoxed forehead showing minimal movement. "Unusual how?" Karen's eyes darted around the room, as if invisible spies might be listening. "I've done some research. Those chimes, they're not just decorative, they're creating energy disturbances." By the time the book club meeting concluded, the story had mutated. Margaret Henderson, who taught yoga and believed passionately in crystal healing, was convinced the wind chimes were creating a spiritual vortex. Linda Thompson, no relation to Marcus, claimed they were generating negative ions that could disrupt the neighborhood's chakra alignment. Social media became Karen's weapon of choice. She created a private Facebook group called Maple Grove Safety Watch and began posting cryptic messages. Doctored photos appeared, the wind chimes superimposed over ominous backgrounds, with captions hinting at supernatural interference. "Have you noticed the strange energy since the new resident arrived?" One post read, accompanied by a blurry photo of the wind chimes taken from an upstairs window. Most residents were initially skeptical, but in a neighborhood where conformity was a religion and gossip was the primary form of entertainment, doubt began to take root. Marcus, meanwhile, remained gloriously unaware of the brewing storm. He continued his routine, morning runs that took him through the neighborhood, evening barbecues where he'd invite neighbors over, the wind chimes providing a haunting musical backdrop. What Karen didn't anticipate was Marcus's growing popularity. His extensive travel stories, told with a combination of academic precision and adventurous charm, began drawing neighbors to his front porch. What started as awkward, curiosity-driven visits transformed into impromptu gatherings. The Thompson wind chime incident, as it would later be known, created unexpected alliances. Roger Martinez, a retired military veteran who lived 2 doors down, found himself fascinated by Marcus's stories of international reporting. Emily Chen, a software engineer who typically kept to herself, discovered a shared love of anthropological research. Karen's campaign reached fever pitch when she began distributing homemade pamphlets, printed on high-quality cardstock, because even paranoid propaganda deserved aesthetic excellence. These documents suggested elaborate conspiracy theories. One claimed the wind chimes were creating interdimensional portals. Another suggested they were broadcasting secret signals to unknown entities. The pamphlets were a masterpiece of paranoid design, intricate diagrams showing supposed energy lines, pseudo-scientific language that sounded just credible enough to make the less critical readers pause. What Karen didn't realize was that her efforts were having the opposite effect. Each bizarre claim, each increasingly outlandish theory, made Marcus more intriguing. The neighborhood that had once been a model of suburban uniformity was slowly transforming, conversations becoming more animated, curiosity replacing blind conformity. the wind chimes continued to sing, a melodious soundtrack to the brewing rebellion. Little did anyone know this was just the beginning of a suburban revolution that would shake Maple Grove Estates to its perfectly manicured foundations. Officer Daniel Rodriguez had seen his share of bizarre suburban calls, but this was a masterpiece of absurdity. He'd worked gang units in downtown, responded to high-stakes domestic disputes, and survived hurricane evacuations. Nothing could have prepared him for Karen Whitmore and her wind chime conspiracy. Elena Martinez, his partner of 7 years, had that look, the one that said she was simultaneously trying not to laugh and preparing to document every single detail of this encounter for their inevitable station break room storytelling. Marcus Thompson stood on his porch, backlit by the soft glow of interior lights, looking like he'd just stepped out of a National Geographic documentary. His stance was relaxed, but there was something in his eyes, a hint of amusement, a trace of academic curiosity that suggested he was mentally cataloging every moment of this encounter. So, Daniel began, his professional tone carefully modulated. We received a call about a supernatural event involving wind chimes. Karen thrust forward her makeshift spirit-catching device, a contraption that looked like it had been assembled during a late-night craft emergency. Copper wire intertwined with Christmas lights, kitchen utensils dangling precariously, and what appeared to be a crystal from a broken chandelier hung at its center. "It's not just wind chimes," Karen declared, her voice a mixture of hysteria and bureaucratic authority. "These are portal generators, interdimensional communication devices." Elena bit her lower lip, desperately trying to maintain her professional composure. In 7 years of partnership, Daniel had never seen her struggle so hard to keep a straight face. Marcus stepped forward, and the wind chimes behind him seemed to react, their brass tubes catching the evening light, creating a soft, almost musical movement. "Perhaps," he said, his voice calm and academic, "we could discuss the cultural significance of wind chimes." What happened next was pure suburban theater. Karen launched into a presentation that would have made a conspiracy theorist proud. She had prepared, of course she had prepared. Poster boards materialized from seemingly nowhere, each covered in intricate diagrams showing supposed energy lines, mystical connections, and what she claimed were documented supernatural frequencies. Daniel noticed Marcus's reaction. Most people would have been defensive, angry even. But Marcus was taking notes. Literally taking notes in a small leather-bound journal, occasionally nodding as Karen explained her theories. "The brass composition," Karen was saying, "creates a harmonic resonance that can pierce dimensional barriers. My research," she emphasized the word with a dramatic pause, "suggests these are not ordinary wind chimes." Elena couldn't take it anymore. A snort of laughter escaped, quickly disguised as a cough. Marcus, to everyone's surprise, was thoroughly engaged. "Fascinating theory," he said, "though I'm more interested in the anthropological perspectives of sound in cultural communication." The confrontation had transformed. What started as a potential arrest turned into an impromptu academic discussion. Daniel watched in bewilderment as Karen and Marcus began debating the metaphysical properties of sound, with Elena occasionally throwing in surprisingly knowledgeable comments. The wind chimes continued their melodious dance, seemingly enjoying the entire performance. As the evening light faded, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn, one thing became clear. Maple Grove Estates would never be the same. The carefully constructed walls of suburban conformity were crumbling, one wind chime note at a time. And somewhere, Marcus's adventurous grandmother was definitely laughing. The community center had never seen such a turnout. What began as a routine HOA meeting had transformed into a suburban spectacle that would be discussed for generations. Roger Martinez arrived early, his military-issued clipboard in hand, looking like he was about to conduct a strategic briefing. Emily Chen sat near the front, her laptop open, ready to live tweet what promised to be the most exciting event in Maple Grove Estates history. Chairs were filled to capacity. The back wall was lined with standing room-only residents, their faces a mixture of excitement, curiosity, and barely contained suburban drama. Karen Whitmore took the stage first, her presentation prepared with the precision of a military campaign. Poster boards displayed her evidence, a complex web of conspiracy theories connecting Marcus's wind chimes to everything from interdimensional portals to potential alien communication. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice trembling with righteous indignation, "we are facing an unprecedented threat to our community's safety and aesthetic integrity." The first challenge came from an unexpected source. Janet Henderson, a retired high school debate teacher, raised her hand. Janet had always been the voice of reason in Maple Grove, and she was not about to let Karen's paranoia go unchallenged. "Ms. Whitmore," she interrupted, her voice cutting through the tension, "could you explain the scientific basis for your claims?" Marcus sat at the back of the room, a slight smile playing on his lips. He'd faced far more intense interrogations during his years of investigative journalism. This was practically a friendly conversation. One by one, neighbors began to share their experiences. Robert Chen, a software engineer, presented a detailed acoustic analysis of the wind chimes, complete with sound wave diagrams that suggested they were nothing more than a harmless musical instrument. Emily's live tweets were gaining traction, with residents who couldn't attend following every dramatic moment. Roger Martinez stood up, his military bearing commanding immediate attention. "In my 30 years of service," he declared, "I've encountered genuine threats. These wind chimes, they're not one of them." The tide was turning. Stories emerged that painted Marcus in a different light. The time he helped the Petersons move heavy furniture, how he'd rescued Mrs. Rodriguez's cat from a tree, the impromptu history lessons he'd shared during neighborhood gatherings, turning mundane conversations into fascinating explorations of global cultures. Karen's carefully constructed narrative began to crumble. Emily Chen's research added another layer. She'd investigated the wind chimes' origins, discovering they were a rare set crafted by a renowned artisan in Peru, a piece of cultural heritage more than a supernatural threat. The police officers who had responded to the 911 call were called to provide testimony. Daniel Rodriguez's matter-of-fact description of the incident drew unexpected laughter. Elena Martinez's professional assessment further deflated Karen's claims. "Ma'am," she had said during her testimony, "the only portal I saw was to a very interesting conversation about cultural anthropology." As the meeting progressed, it became clear that Karen had overplayed her hand. The neighborhood that once prided itself on uniformity was discovering something new: the value of diversity, curiosity, and individual expression. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Robert Whitmore, Karen's husband, who had spent decades in silent compliance, stood up. "Enough," he said simply. "These wind chimes have brought more life to our neighborhood than we've seen in decades." The room erupted in applause. Marcus sat quietly, the wind chimes' melody seemingly echoing through the community center, a soundtrack to a suburban revolution. Maple Grove Estates would never be the same. The aftermath of the community meeting was nothing short of a suburban earthquake. Maple Grove Estates had been fundamentally transformed, and at the epicenter stood Marcus Thompson and his now legendary wind chimes. Within a week, an emergency HOA election was called. Karen Whitmore, once the undisputed queen of suburban bureaucracy, found herself not just removed from her position, but socially ostracized. Her carefully constructed network of gossip and control had crumbled faster than a poorly mixed soufflé. Marcus, to everyone's surprise, most of all his own, was nominated for HOA vice president. It was Roger Martinez who made the nomination, his military precision lending gravitas to what could have been a comedy routine. "We need someone who understands community," he'd said during the nomination, "not someone who tries to control it." The election wasn't even close. Marcus won by a landslide, receiving more votes than any HOA board member in the neighborhood's history. His first act was both revolutionary and hilarious. He drafted a new set of HOA guidelines that celebrated individual expression while maintaining the core principles of community respect. The document was a masterpiece of bureaucratic poetry, each page carefully worded to allow creativity while preventing genuine chaos. Wind chimes were now officially recognized as acceptable exterior decorative items with cultural significance. Robert Whitmore, liberated from years of silent compliance, began to transform as well. He started taking photography classes, his first project a stunning collection of neighborhood portraits that captured the unique character of each resident. His wife Karen was conspicuously absent from these images. Emily Chen organized a neighborhood cultural exchange program. What started as monthly potlucks evolved into a vibrant community initiative. Residents began sharing stories, recipes, and traditions that had previously been hidden behind perfectly manicured lawns and closed doors. The wind chimes became a symbol of something larger. They hung on Marcus's porch, no longer just a musical instrument but a metaphor for the neighborhood's transformation. Visitors would stop, listen, and marvel at how something so simple could represent such profound change. Karen, meanwhile, found herself on the outside looking in. Her attempts to rally support fell flat. The neighborhood that once hung on her every word now saw her as a cautionary tale, a relic of a bygone era of suburban oppression. During one of the community meetings, Marcus shared the story of the wind chimes, how they had belonged to his grandmother Evelyn, an anthropologist who had traveled the world, collecting stories and challenging established narratives. The chimes, he explained, were more than just a musical instrument. They were a connection to a larger world, a reminder that beauty often comes from unexpected places. The most surprising transformation was Robert Whitmore's. No longer content to sit in the background, he became an active community member. He started a neighborhood history project, documenting the stories of longtime residents and celebrating the diversity that had always existed just beneath the surface of suburban conformity. On the one-year anniversary of Marcus's arrival, the neighborhood threw a block party. Wind chimes of all shapes and sizes hung from porches. The sound was a symphony of diversity: brass, ceramic, wood, each telling its own story. Karen watched from a distance, a diminished figure. The neighborhood she had tried to control had become something far more beautiful than she could have ever imagined. As the evening light faded and the wind chimes sang their melodious song, Marcus stood on his porch, surrounded by neighbors who had become more than just people who happened to live on the same street. They had become a true community. The wind chimes continued to sing, a reminder